having a fitness business that could easily apply. And if you're willing to put a little bit of effort in there, you can have a much higher return that, as we know, can have that snowball effect.
Hey, Pat and Doug back with another episode of the Wealthy Fitness Entrepreneur. And today we're going to talk about getting started in building wealth. And I'm going to largely do interviewing with Doug this time. And I think just to give you some context, if you've been a business owner and you're paying yourself and you're finally getting over the hump and you're doing okay, you feel like you've got some stability and some traction. Still, one of the challenges that I've seen throughout 2 decades of doing this is finally jumping through that one hoop of getting started. We had somebody at the IBA meeting today who just started doing like their first investment. And it's a big leap for people. Like, oh, hey, I'm going to start investing in retirement. It doesn't matter if it's investing in an index fund or in your case, and this wasn't the first thing that you did from a wealth building standpoint, but I want to talk about your first purchase of a short-term rental and how that happened and how you got in that frame of mind. Because I do think that at the stage you're at now, sometimes it can seem like a big leap. Hey, Doug's got a portfolio of properties that are worth almost $15 million and all that. Well, yeah, that's down the line, but it had to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. So talk about that first purchase.
So first purchase was, for context, 2020. And so we were at that point 8 years into business. So, I had the approach that want to pay myself first, always trying to drain out as much of the cash. Once your retained earnings are taken care of in the gym, my approach was always to take out, as long as I had my little kitty for the gym, to just take out as much cash as I could. And I started stuffing that away in a separate account. And, some of that was to make the other accounts look smaller. I think that's a big strategy, the kind of game that I continue to play today, is I want the accounts that I actually pay bills out of to constantly look small, because then you're much tighter with some of your choices. But the first purchase was a lake house about 2 hours away from our primary residence. We were not planning on doing it a short-term rental. Obviously, we were certainly aware and attacking the benefits of real estate, but I didn't even know it was going to be a short-term rental. We just wanted a second home as a lake house and knew it was a good long-term investment, let alone the cash flow that it has now on a monthly basis. But what's nice about short-term rentals, and the first one in particular, is you can buy it as a second home, which I'm not a mortgage lender, and you can certainly go through that process, which would be the first step. But you typically, just like when you buy your primary residence, you typically don't need to put a large percentage down compared to, say, a commercial vehicle where you need 25, 30, 50% down. Some of these second homes can be bought with as little as 10% down. So if you reverse engineer that, if I go and want to buy a $500,000 home, I'm not saying $50,000 is a small amount of money, but if you're profiting, say, $10,000 from your gym and you need half of that to contribute to your personal expenses, and you can stash half of that towards your kind of investment fund, well, within a year, you've got the funds to be able to make that first acquisition. So there was no magic, like had this instant surge of money and bought it. It was just taking a small amount every month and stuffing it into this investment account to then be able to, wait until it reached a certain amount, pull that out for the down payment.
So you bought that, and interestingly enough, 2020, we both vacationed to the Outer Banks at the same time and stayed in short-term rentals. Mm-hmm. And then I remember the conversations happening, you saying, hey, I think I may buy a lake house vacation home. So where did the shift come that went from, hey, this is a long-term investment, this is a legacy play for our family to have somewhere to go, to build traditions, to, hey, this is a vehicle to generate some profit?
Yeah, I think any entrepreneur, you try to look for opportunities, and the market itself is very desirable in the summertime. And I happened to, not intentionally, but we happened to buy it right around the June. I think we closed in June or July So we closed during peak season. And obviously, we're not going to be able to use it full time. We weren't moving there. So, we had at that point 2 kids. And so we weren't able to get up there even every weekend. And so looking at the business opportunity of, oh, let me just throw it up on Airbnb. And certainly some degree, I think, of luck, where if you're not familiar with the short-term rental industry, there was a brief shutdown when the pandemic first started, but very quickly it actually spiked to be at its peak because the demand shifted away from hotels and people wanting to be in more isolated areas and data. So the demand for basically a lake house where you have your own house and you can spread out and get away from, we had a ton of people that were trying to get away from the city. And so throwing it up on Airbnb was, give credit to studying good businesses. It's very easy. They make it very easy. That was something in hindsight I learned, like snap a couple pictures on your phone and a little address verification and you're up and running on Airbnb. And then saw the bookings come in and you start realizing, well, okay, this is a business just like any other business.
And so I think that there's so much hidden insight in that, right? Because I don't think it's uncommon for business owners in our industry to feel like, oh, you know what, I've been grinding for so long and I've gone without for so long hours. And so I want to enjoy some of the fruits of my efforts, right? And so the idea of, hey, just go and siphon off this money and throw it in an account you're not going to touch for 20 years can be maybe not as appealing. And I should throw the disclaimer out here saying I have a significant portion of my investments tied up in things like index funds. So, but this is a win, right? Like you get to enjoy some of those rewards. You have a vacation home. You have something tangible that you can enjoy now, but it's building wealth for the future because, it appreciates over time. You're building equity, but then there's a cash flow component too. So, I mean, it seems like a pretty strong play from a bunch of fronts.
Yeah. I mean, you now looking at it, you do have to approach it. I think it's a choice whether you decide, if we start at the basic of paying yourself first, like that to me is step number one, is let's make sure you're paying yourself first. And some of that pay should be for investments, whether you do short-term rentals, index funds, combination of both, other investments, what have you. Short-term rentals for me was a active way to invest, right? There's certainly the benefit of having this passive investment where you just push money every month into account and don't look at it, and 10 years from now that's going to go up. And that's great. And to be clear, I still do a portion of our investments towards that because that to me is my security blanket should the short-term rentals ever have a dip, or those are obviously higher risk. But what's nice that you don't have in the passive side that you do have in the active side, yes, it's more work. So short-term rental, getting that to generate cash flow is more work. However, if you are willing to put in the work, it can have a bigger upside. So the activeness becomes a game that you can play, and you can mess with your marketing to try to get more bookings. You can mess with your operations to try to make things easier. You can look at the guest experience just like you would the client experience. And so I think there's a lot of carryovers that you learn having a gym and having a fitness business that could easily apply. And if you're willing to put a little bit of effort in there, you can have a much higher return that, as we know, can have that snowball effect.
Well, and I threw it in there and I don't want to discount it. I mean, you bought this for, a family experience thing. And I think that's one of the things that is maybe an unsaid, but really kind of pleasant benefit for people who have really paid their dues and pushed and worked really hard and feel like, hey, I've earned some rewards. Well, this is something that you can go allocate, a couple weeks a year, a few weeks a year, however much you choose to make this your vacation, your time. But I've heard you say many times over, I like to get paid to take vacations, not pay to take vacations. I mean, it's something that I think fits some of the mentality I hear from people, because I understand. I mean, maybe logically, hey, we need to go invest and we need to put money away or whatever else. But I also understand all that goes into starting a small business and getting it over the hump. And so this is a way to build long-term wealth without feeling like, hey, I'm sacrificing, and I don't get to enjoy anything until like retirement.
Yeah, we have a client in our boardroom group that I think you do have to be clear. Like, I would want to have your gym profitable before this is even on the table. And you're paying yourself easily, like you can easily pay your living expenses. The key then is to continue to be aggressive, which we've talked about in other episodes about this complacency that happens with certain levels of fitness business ownership, where you're making a good income, you're paying your bills, and you get this level of complacency. So thus you never create even more of a spread to be able to do these things. So if you set that target that, hey, I need to have 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever grand, throw out your number, find your number that you need in this separate account. If that becomes a quote expense on your plan every month, now you tend to be a little bit more aggressive with your marketing. You tend to be a little bit more aggressive with growing your revenue to try to pull out more from the gym. And we had a client in boardroom that same thing, wanted a second home for his family. And you can start small. We have one client that's under contract on one that was 250 grand. We have one client that's, I think it's 450. So you don't need to go save up 100, 200 grand to get into this. You can get something where even if you're starting now, pushing $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month into an account, a year from now, you can have a decent chunk towards that down payment. So it's certainly doable.
Very cool. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing some of this stuff this episode, because I do think that yes, the 8 figures of a portfolio is something wonderful to aspire to, but somebody has to know what step one is. And I see that a lot. Like, people have that, they'll look at people on social media and say, wow, that's impressive. But if you reverse engineer it and see where they started, there are a lot of clues there. There's a lot of insight. So, appreciate you unpacking some of that and really pulling back the curtain on how people can get started if they want to build wealth through short-term rentals.
For sure. Step one, start there.
All right. Another episode in the books of the Wealthy Fitness Entrepreneur, and we'll be back and talk to you soon.